All right, guys, a while back, the lockpicking lawyer and I designed a pick, and we donated the design of this pick to Sparrows up in Canada with the deal that, they'll own the rights and everything to it. They just have to produce it produce the pick at an economical price point for everybody else. So I don't know when this is going to be released. I know you guys are going to ask me. This is a prototype. There are going to be some refinements to that. I've been asking them. I read the same boards you guys do, and I always got the same answer. They always say, oh, soon. We're going to release it soon, but never gave us a date. Well, I was talking to them on the phone the other day about another project, and they let it slip, a word that it was imminent. It's going to be imminent, which I think is probably sooner than soon. So in that spirit, I thought this would be a great time, right before we all got these in our hands, to kind of review how these locks work and what are the design features of this type of lock that we're able to exploit to get these new picks to take advantage of to allow us to pick these. So I've taken a disc detainer lock and I've cut him apart. And a lot of you guys ask, well, why don't you just shim it? And I thought this cutaway would show perfectly. Here is the actuator part of the core. There's the brass part is the core, and you see some ball bearings. There's one there, and there's one there. And you notice how the cam is turned so that those ball bearings, it's impossible for them to move in towards the center of the lock to release that shackle. Just not going to happen. It's physically impossible unless you use tremendous hydraulic force to force that shackle open. You notice we got a cutaway here, and there's a cutaway on the other side as well. When you turn the core, then those ball bearings have room to compress, and then you can get it open. It'll move out of the shackle. What prevents us from rotating that core? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'm trying to do this without dropping it. The thing that prevents this entire core from rotating is a thing called a sidebar. And there he is right there, that little, very simple piece of, looks almost like a piece of wire, a little rod right there. And you notice that rod, there's a little slot. Let me move him back there. A little slot that he fits into, and machined into the side of the lock is this wide groove right here. Now look at the diameter of the sidebar and look at the diameter of that slot. So even if we don't have, let me move him back, even if we don't have key, the core of these slops. There's quite a bit of slop. Now why would they do that? Well, pretty simple. These locks were originally designed for extreme environments. So there's going to be ice and rain, there's going to be corrosion, there's going to be insects crawling in there. The keys are going to be dirty when they jam them in there. And if that dirt and grit and little pieces of junk get up in there, and this is machined too precisely, and there's not any slop, then that grit and debris will prevent the lock from turning, and it'll prevent that little bar from getting out of the slot. So they make it wide, so there's room for all that crap to get down inside of there, and the lock will still function reliably. Okay, inside, the only way to get this rod, this little sidebar, to move out of that groove is to allow it to recess into the core. But that's prevented. Right there, you notice the side, all these discs, this is the first disc, obviously. He can't compress. Again, we need a lot of hydraulic pressure. So by turning him like that, we're going to be pushing that rod into the side of these discs, going to be camming him in there. And when that happens, it starts to drag on these discs. So when we turn our pick, we can feel it dragging. And as it drags, it'll eventually drag around and it'll reach one of these little gates. And we'll pull it out and take a look in a moment. But once it reaches that little gate, you'll feel a little ka-chunk as it falls, as that little sidebar falls into that gate. And that way you know he's been picked. Pretty cool. All right, a couple other things about this disc. Let's go ahead and pull him out. I'm really nervous about dropping this guy. Let's slide him all the way out and try not to drop the sidebar. Okay, the sidebar is the full length, and he's riding up against all of the discs inside of the disc pack. So just picking that first one is not going to help you. Let's pull him out of there and set him here for a moment, and let's take a look at our lock. All right, now the two flat sides of that rotate. Our ball bearings can then be cammed. Again, there's no fancy springs, actuators, or anything like that in here. These are just a couple of steel ball bearings that when you pull up on the shackle, they'll cam those ball bearings up out of the way and allow you to get an open. So again, no shimming. These are really, really great locks, a great design. All right, let's get back to this little guy. There's our actuator. Got the cutouts on both sides for the ball bearings. And let's just grab this guy right here. There's two things we ought to be looking at. The first is the disc itself, and the second is the spacer. And I'll just set two of those down. So it's going to alternate like that all the way through the disc pack. Disc, spacer, all the way back in there. So when we slide our pick in there, you'll notice that the spacer has a nice wide hole. Let me grab him. Try to grab him. Nice wide hole. So our pick, a lot of guys talk about, well, the tip's going to get caught in the spacer. It's impossible. It is not going to happen. Now, there are some higher quality locks that have the same shape in the spacer. So if you slide your pick into one of those and you start trying to rotate it and it completely seizes up, it will not turn. You know you're lined up with a spacer. Just release your pressure a little bit, slide it a little bit further in, and then try turning again. And that way, when it turns, you know you're located on one of these discs. All right. Take a look at one more thing. You notice on this lock body, now that I pulled it out, you can see that this is all cut away to allow us to see all those discs. Why did they do that? Why didn't they make it solid all the way around? That's because there's these little limiter, these little nibs that stick up here. So when we slide our key in there, all of these will be able to rotate, but they won't be able to rotate any more than about a quarter of a turn, because when they get that far, the nib will stop it from over-rotating. That makes sure that all the discs will always be aligned with the key. If these just spun randomly, then the key would work once from the factory, but as soon as we tried to pick it and got all those discs mixed up, we would never again be able to use that key. So that's what that's for, to make sure the key will always work. Again, we got a little cutout, but let's look at the other disc that I pulled out. They're a little easier to hold. And grab our sidebar. All right, remember I talked about the width of the sidebar groove in the lock that helps us pick the locks. It also helps us tension the discs. So let's take a look at one of those discs. When the lock when we're trying to turn the core, we're camming that sidebar against the lock. You probably can't hear that, but you can certainly feel it with the pick. It'll be dragging along. And then when you reach that sidebar, provided it's the binding disc, it'll just fall in there and you'll feel it. It'll feel like it gives, and then it doesn't want to go any further. Now check this out. Notice the diameter of the sidebar, and notice the diameter of that groove. Also look at the groove. They're nice and rounded. It's not square, or it doesn't just come in and fall. There's a lot of slop built into that. Again, that's going to help us find it. Let's say we're picking our disc and we pick it to right there. All we've got to do then, provided there's only one or two discs that aren't aligned with the sidebar, use your pick, rotate all the discs, and just rotate it back and forth, and eventually it'll work its way in there. So a little trick on getting it open. If you think you're almost open, just jiggle it. Chances are you'll jiggle them into place and you get an open. Very, very cool lock. All right, let's take a look at how these are supposed to work. All of the keyways are lined up now, just as if you had pulled out the key. And when that happens, all of the little nibs are all indexed along this side of the lock body, telling you that it's open and they're all lined up. On the other side of the lock, because it's now locked, none of those gates are lined up, not a single one of them. And that little sidebar, I can get him in there, cannot compress inside of the lock body, so he's going to be jammed up inside of that groove. Now, let's take the key and slide him in there. And when we turn the key, notice all the little limiters rotate, but they don't all rotate to the far side. In this case, only 3 of them do. The one that rotates the furthest, which happens to be the one on the front, which is very common, he's the tensioner disc, because once he reaches that rightmost point and all of the discs are lined up with the cuts in the groove, the sidebar sinks down inside of all the little grooves, and he's now flush. He's out of that cutout in the body of the lock, and that first disc, which is now fallen out, will then turn the entire core, lining up the 2 flat spots with the ball bearings. Very, very cool design, very simple design. All right, guys, this is how these things work. There's a lot of things in here that you can take advantage of in order to get an open. These are not that difficult, but I will tell you, it's going to take a little bit of practice. There's a completely different skill set to picking this lock as opposed to picking a pin tumbler or a dimple lock or wafer locks. These are very cool. It's a neat skill to have in your bag of tricks. These locks are becoming more and more common, and they're a lot of fun to pick as well. Anyway, guys, that's how they work. Just like you, I really anticipate. I can't wait to get the new pick, see what it turns out like, so I can start playing with it. Appreciate your time, guys. Stay safe, stay legal, and I hope this helped you understand how we can exploit these locks. Thanks, guys.